Thank you all so much for being here. You're all a big part of making this event a success. We're going to start off with a topic near and dear to my heart, which is advocating for high-risk users. Neither security nor privacy are one size fits all. Even the words themselves, security and privacy, mean different things to different people. And this becomes abundantly clear when you try to translate those words into many other languages and find yourself having to try to explain to the person doing the translation what you think they mean, only to discover that the other person has a different idea. Understanding user needs and threat models is a key to building useful, helpful, effective, and necessary technology for everyone around the world. We're going to hear from 5 kick-ass speakers now on what they've learned from working with and advocating for different groups. The way that our sessions are going to be formatted is we're going to have 5 excellent talks followed by a moderated panel up here on stage. Without further ado, I'd like to start off by introducing our first speaker, Eva Galprin. She's the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Director of Cybersecurity. Eva wields a formidable mix of political science degrees and technical knowledge to advocate for technical rights, as well as the needs of journalists and activists. I first became familiar with some of her research reports on malware, and I'm thrilled that she's here to speak with us today.
Let's get this party started. So out of all of the speakers, I'm going to be the only one doing this with no slides, and you're not really missing out on a lot because it was just 10 pictures of cats. So welcome everyone to Human Factors. This talk is everything you always wanted to know about advocating for vulnerable populations, but we're afraid to ask. So the first thing that everybody really needs to understand about vulnerable populations is that you don't understand them. The most common misconception that I come across among people who want to do this kind of work or who are interested in doing this kind of work is that they think they know what vulnerable populations are, what they want, and what they need without being part of that population or studying them or doing their homework. And so the first example that I'm going to use is from my own experience. I think that it's really important that if I'm going to point to mistakes that people make, that I should start with my own. So I'm going to start with domestic violence. And let me tell you, finding a cute kitten for that was not easy. So a few months ago, I tweeted that if there were any women who had been in domestic abuse situations with hackers who had later been threatened by those hackers with a compromise of their devices, that they could contact me and I would make sure that they would get, that the devices would get looked at and they would get like a full forensic analysis. And I didn't expect this tweet to go viral. So I think something like 16,000 retweets and 24,000 likes or whatever, shares on Tumblr and other numbers that don't particularly matter. My inbox started getting very full. And I heard from a tremendous number of women. Also, I heard from men who were advocating for their female friends or partners. I heard from men who had been in similar situations. But mostly, I heard from women. And I discovered something very interesting, which was that very few of the cases which came to me actually required any kind of forensic analysis. You would think that the people who are in this situation are like, well, has my device been owned? And what was more common was that their former partner was making a threat as a way of continuing to control them. As a general rule, if you are a hacker and you have compromised somebody's device successfully, you have root on their phone or on their laptop, and you're reading all of their email and you're tracking all of their movements, you want to keep quiet about it so that you can continue to track all of these things. So this was a very different sort of problem. So I'm not saying that domestic abusers don't use remote access tools and things like that on devices, but that the overlap between the people who are making these threats and the people who are actually rooting devices is very, very small, for the reason that most people who have rooted the devices don't want to give away their advantage. And that was not something that I thought when I started this. I'm like, everybody needs forensic analysis. This is totally a problem that can be solved with forensics. And then it turns out that this is a problem that can be solved by carefully leading people through: why do you think your device has been compromised? Have you seen anything strange going on? Has somebody compromised your account? And it turns out that compromising people's email accounts or Instagram accounts or Snapchat accounts is much easier than compromising their devices, especially if you are a person's longtime partner and you may have shared passwords or bullied the password out of your former partner. Or you can easily guess their security questions, which is also something that we've seen happen all the time. Frequently, the partners have a lot of very deep and extensive personal knowledge about the person and about their family, and they leverage that into appearing to be a much more skilled hacker than they actually are. And so the primary service that I ended up paying to all of these people who contacted me was slowly walking them through exactly what it was that their abuser was doing, and kind of dispelling the magic of hacking. Because people frequently think, if they're not hackers, that hacking is magic, that you take over a computer, that the person can just snap their fingers and you have full control over the device, and that's simply not true. There are some other things that we want to think about when we're talking to vulnerable populations, and the next one is, am I the right person for this job? So I was recently contacted by a guy who runs an organization that connects trainers to communities, and he expressed concern that most of the trainers who were contacting him were white men, and most of the organizations that were looking for training were, grassroots organizations and people of color and LGBTQ organizations all over the United States. And he was like, perhaps this pairing will not work out. Some things might go wrong here. Should I be putting these people together? And what I recommend in these situations is that well-meaning people with the technical knowledge should partner with people who have the personal knowledge of the vulnerable populations. Partner with somebody from the population or who understands the population, and combine your powers to do good, because nothing is as embarrassing as being a well-meaning, clueless techie in a room full of people and saying, I am here from the internet to tell you what to do, because it's not very effective. And a few examples of the ways in which these things are not effective include the importance of meeting people where they are and not where you think that they should be. And this involves a couple of dogmas. Probably the most common dogma that I see among people who go out to meet vulnerable populations is use Tor, use Signal, and then put on a cape and fly away. Shortest training, very short. It turns out that most of the populations that I talk to don't really understand the difference between encryption in transit and encryption at rest. They don't understand when you use Tor and how Tor is useful, or when you use Signal and how Signal is useful. The most common misconception that I come across in sort of non-technical populations is that Tor and Signal are somehow interchangeable, which I imagine most people in this audience understand is a profound misunderstanding of the situation. Furthermore, there are situations where neither Tor nor Signal are going to help, and they're not necessarily the best tools. This is a very frequent argument that I have with people who come from tech backgrounds, who come from Silicon Valley. They say you should use the best tools, you should use the most secure stuff. And this is actually advice that doesn't make a lot of sense for some situations. For example, Signal prioritizes sending an encrypted message over getting your message to you on time. And so if you need to send timely messages, like, hey, partner, I am coming to dinner, or I have bought the groceries, or we're going to meet at this restaurant, um, then sometimes Signal is really not the best choice because you will be receiving that message, say, 6 to 8 hours later, or maybe the next day, and you're going to end up sitting in a restaurant waiting for your partner, and they will not come. And one day I am going to publish an entire blog post about this titled Moxie Marlinspike is Single-Handedly Destroying My Marriage. The other dogma I think that we should be very careful about when dealing with vulnerable populations is open source dogma. It is really common, especially at sort of EFFE kind of organizations, to say that the best tools are open source, that open source software is really great, that many eyes make bugs shallow, and therefore open source is what we should all be using all the time. But I am not Richard Stallman, and thank God. And I think that the most important thing is to recommend people tools that work. And so in the case of, say, password managers, sometimes I will have a population to whom I recommend a paid password manager like 1Password, and that's if they need to go, they need everybody in an organization to have it, and they have enough money to shell out for it. I think 1Password actually has a really excellent user interface, and that's why I recommend it sometimes over open source tools. And finally, the very last dogma that I like to counter is the just quit Facebook dogma. And let me tell you that this is not terribly good advice if you are talking to a room full of activists, because essentially what you're doing is you are telling activists, don't do activism. Don't go where the people are. And if you give people this kind of advice, they're simply not going to take it. It's not going to work. And you will not have done a very good job of advocating for them. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. Next up, we have Jessie Irwin. Jessie is head of security at Tendermint, where she's responsible for developing, maintaining, and delivering their security strategy. Previously, she worked at 1Password. Apart from her impressive role backgrounds, I first came across Jessie on Twitter, actually, where she was tweeting about her old lady gang. I was very much charmed and impressed by her funny but respectful discussion of this topic. My grandmother is named Shirley. She's a fierce and brilliant woman who I look up to and admire. I hope to someday be half the woman she is. And she deserves online security and privacy just as much as any of the technologists in this room, which is something that I think, honestly, sometimes people forget. So I appreciate that Jessie is here with us today to talk about her squad.
Hello. Fair warning, if anyone starts shouting things in the audience, the old lady gang is watching. They live in a neighborhood not far from here. They will literally come and get you. They know where you are, so watch yourselves. So when I'm talking about my old lady gang, I've thought a lot about, do I drag them in to have a panel? Do I find a cartoon? Who's the best old lady gang I know? So today we're going to be talking in terms of these ladies who apparently have figured out all these Jedi tricks that we didn't even know they had. Once upon a time, when I first moved to San Francisco, I didn't know anyone. And the only people who really noticed in my neighborhood if I was alive, dead, functioning, were the old ladies that hung out on the corner with their dogs. Now, in this particular city, I have a feeling that old lady gangs run pretty deep. If you want to know what's going on in the neighborhood, if you want to know who misbehaved, who drove through the hedge drunk, if you want to know who's having problems doing God knows what in the homeowners association, this is the group. What I learned from these ladies, though, was for all of the power and all of these amazing life experiences that they had, once in a while, they had technology problems. I'm not sure exactly how it started, but one day somebody had a broken iPad that came out of a purse, And they looked at me and realized, oh, you do that technology stuff, but I think I can talk to you because you acknowledge my existence when I am out on the street. Also, I like the dog. I tried to dog knock the dog, whatever, long story. But my old lady gang came to me at first with technology problems. They didn't identify them as security problems. They were just like, hey, this thing's not working. So when you get the iPad that's like 5 years old and the passcode doesn't exist, and you start noticing that, oh, this thing's not updated. Oh no, this is a security nightmare. It feels like a problem. The first instinct is, oh no, this is bad. You should not do this. Except she didn't come to me to say, hey, what am I doing wrong? She came to me to say, hey, I had a problem and I can't get my technology to work. We were not in a spot where this was about, hey, I need security training. It was, hey, this thing and I have a complicated relationship, and I'm pretty sure we're going to have to break up, or I'm going to have to throw it out a window, or whatever. But this isn't working for me. Come on, slide. You know you want to advance. So what I learned from, at first, with the broken iPad situation, is there's a really big disconnect between what we expect an at-risk user to look like and what they actually look like. My old lady gang, all 4 of them, are fancy old ladies who live in a nice San Francisco neighborhood. However, they have a threat model, and that threat model isn't just that, oh, I can't use my machine. One woman, who you may not think of as at risk when she's got her purse in the right place and she is bossing down the street, has memory problems. Another woman has a significant struggle with some of her family, and there is a back and forth tussle about who has control of what and who is able to access computers and update devices. And there's no good way to solve that problem for them without a lot of hard work. Another woman basically came to me and said, I love all of this technology stuff. My husband spent his entire career building it. I spend my life trying to figure out how to use it, but I don't feel like it's for me. And those are really painful things to hear, because when you look at elderly people as a population, they've got a lot of good things going for them. And they're actually a pretty ripe population that will fall for social engineering attacks and things that are not necessarily technical if you come in at them in the right way. Something I learned is that there's lots of security advice on the internet, and most of it is crap. Some of the things that you will find in the first 10 results of a Google search contradict each other. They're not helpful. And when you're trying to help, particularly an older population, improve what they're doing in security, you cannot come at them from the point of technology. You cannot say, oh, hey, let's talk about malware today. Oh, hey, let me tell you about all of this stuff you can hook into your email account so that you don't fall for some 0-day God knows what contraption. Literally no one knows what that is and cares about it. The right way when you're working with an older population or a population that is not necessarily fluent with technology, the right way to approach these things is to come at them from life experience. I could spend all day talking about phishing emails and saying, don't click a link. I could also say, hey, let's have a conversation about con artistry. This is what con artistry looks like in the real world. This is what it translates to on the internet. So if you can identify this problem in the real world, great. Now let's talk about how to get you out of it. One of the most important things I learned here was that improving security is just like encouraging people to adopt better health habits, to stop smoking, to drink less, to change their diet. There's a lot of support that needs to happen, and the support comes in the form of giving people other options, showing people how to be successful and how to make a positive change instead of telling them not to do something. I could tell my old lady gang all day, don't reuse passwords, but at no point in their lives did they ever sit down and have a computer class outside of a library meetup that they've arranged. These things just aren't part of their day-to-day. So if I tell them not to do something, they don't have the tools to solve this problem for themselves. They also need a little bit of training. One of the things that we did, which was really fun, I started talking to them about password managers, and they were like, what the hell is this thing? Which is a perfectly reasonable response. It was also, what the hell is this thing and why does it look so messy? I don't like the way it feels when it's all messy. Okay, that's fair. I can show you how to make it less messy. But when we're talking about these security changes and these improvements and tooling, what was really cool was these ladies were like, we'll practice. If this were a sport, I'd have to go dribble basketballs and, not destroy my manicure, which was a great comment. But we have to practice, and practice doesn't always look the way that we, as security people, expect that practice to look. Another thing to think about, especially with populations that are older or who may have significant memory impairments, physical disabilities, or all kinds of other access issues that we as security people never planned for, everything we know might be wrong. We can run around all day and scream that those password notebooks are awful. However, if the people you're working with aren't using a password notebook at all, or the password is something that is infinitely guessable and also their home phone number because that looks like it is a complex 10-digit long passcode for a phone, that's a problem. Starting people on the path of getting from having almost nothing or being almost nowhere to figuring out where they should be going and supporting that all the way through is absolutely vital. Something that really I will never forget is with one of these ladies, she had a fall and she was in the hospital. When she came home, she had a home health care assistant. And she started noticing things weren't in places that they should have been. One of the things she learned is that home health care assistants, nurses, people who came in for physical therapy, at times would actually prey on the patients they worked with. How do you provide security to someone who might have a memory problem, who needs a recovery process, but is ultimately in a position where physical access to their home and to their life is also right there for the taking of another person who's meant to help them or to take care of them? The last thing that I think is really important, our threat model as security people is not the threat model of the people that we work with, especially when they're older, especially when using technology doesn't make them feel good. And if I had spent all of my time with my neighbors over the past few years drilling them on vocabulary, asking them what a phishing attack is and why it's important to understand all of the parts of these campaigns, they would have never been successful. They would know all of the vocabulary words for attacks. They would know absolutely nothing about defense and protection and what to do. When we're working with these groups, I especially don't think that we should focus on telling them to learn a vocabulary lesson and to do the equivalent of an entire college course of work just to be safe on the internet. What we need to do is tell them what they can do right, what's going to take less than 5 minutes to make their lives better. And we need to remember that it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. This isn't something a blog post fixes. This is something that ultimately requires us to invest in building relationships with people around us and giving longitudinal education experience and support. And with that being said, thank you, Old Lady Gang, for being my surrogate grandmothers. And thanks to all of you for listening.
I have the pleasure of working with our next speaker, Dr. Martin Shelton. Martin is user experience researcher at Google on the Chrome team. I have worked on the Chrome security team for several years now and have had the pleasure of working with Martin for a while. He also writes about digital security for Open News Source and works with the Coral project at the New York Times. Martin has also written some of the clearest and most accessible guides to digital security practices that I've read. So I immediately thought of him when we were planning out this conference. Thank you for being here today, Martin.
Hey, folks. Um, so, yeah, I'm Martin Shelton. As Adrian said, I do a lot of work around digital security for journalists. I got started doing a lot of this work in grad school, where I was studying the security and privacy habits of investigative journalists, and especially in light of the Snowden disclosures at the time. It's a very sexy topic. But as we know, these things come and go. There's interest that waxes and wanes over time. And one of the things that I've learned is that quite often the things that got journalists really excited about digging into digital security habits are things that sometimes we also forget. It's the news cycle, the things that we take for granted about information that seeps into our day-to-day and motivates us to dig a little deeper. So in the case of journalists and digital security, a lot of the work that I do in this space is trying to support journalists on really basics of the basics. Things like, let's talk about how the internet works. Let's talk about how telecommunication systems work. Let's talk about risk assessment. How do you figure out what needs to be protected and what kinds of measures you should put in place to protect it? A lot of the resources that I put together or trainings that I will organize are things or are based around, again, the fundamentals. We need to talk about the basics of authentication, setting up two-factor authentication, how to try to get more, try to nail down your password authentication practices. And what this means for most people is like using unique passwords. What this means for most people is not using short, super predictable passwords. And if this all sounds really foundational, that's because it is. A lot of the time when I talk to people about what they imagine doing this work is like, it sounds very cloak and dagger, where there's a sense that, it evokes some kind of image of Watergate type. We gotta sneak around inside of an empty garage so that we're able to have a conversation with one another in a way that's not going to be surveilled. The truth is that under most circumstances, my friends in the news space, they have a lot of different levels of proficiency. Sometimes they're people who are absolute savants at figuring out, let's talk about threat modeling practices and all the things that I should be doing. And then they put in the work. And correspondingly, there's a lot of different circumstances for which you don't have to bend over backwards in order to be a little bit safer. And sometimes you don't have to bend over backwards to be a lot of bit safer. So it really depends on their situation. But after everything, we've heard a lot today about how exactly people better communicate with their community and better understand the needs of their community. Eva was speaking earlier about trying to come up or meet with community partners, people who better understand the community that you're working with and on their security habits than you might. Jesse spoke about having your own community, the people who you do understand, people who you've invested a lot of personal time in. For me, a lot of the way that I do this is from a user research perspective. So for anybody who's not familiar with user research is all about, it's a systematic practice for trying to figure out how people use technology and then how you can design around their problems and concerns. And so the problems and concerns have to be chief there. And like Eva said earlier, what's true in the security world is also true in the user research world. You cannot assume that you know everything about your community up front. And in fact, in human-computer interaction research broadly, we start with this very foundational assumption that you are not your user, that you know very, very little up front. And with that assumption that you know very little, you can come in with fresh eyes and absorb everything that you can about that community so that you can, in fact, understand them. This means starting with very few assumptions. Now, what I find quite often is that security recommendations that I hear from people who are extraordinarily smart and well-meaning quite often are things that may or may not actually fit into your real-world practice. So if I told somebody, do not put a fingerprint scanner on your device, well, fingerprint scanner can actually be really useful if your threat model is shoulder surfing. Likewise, the idea of having a written notebook. Again, depending on your threat model, this might actually be a more appropriate tactic than doing nothing at all. So after all is said and done, these are really simple practices that we can adopt, but we have to be really contextually sensitive. We have to understand the community that we're working with, and user research is one way of doing that, not the only way, but one way of doing that. Some of the methods that this can involve are things like, let's conduct interviews, let's conduct surveys, let's conduct focus groups, let's gather feedback from the communities with whom we work. Some of the people in this audience actually have participated in some of my research as experts or also as community members. And after everything, this is how I gather feedback in order to better understand what kind of communities that I want to help. And this is the only way that I know how to do this reliably. And so communicating about security needs at the end of the day is not really just about security needs. It's actually about everything else. It's really about understanding people's context and then how those security solutions might be able to fit into their context. And as a consequence, I think that security recommendations should and can be something that can help people to get their work done, the things that they care about done. And so one of the examples that I like to bring up about this is news organizations will occasionally ping me, or journalists will occasionally ping me and say, Martin, I don't want to give away my personal phone number to use Signal, an encrypted messaging app. One of the things that I recommend is you can, for example, set up a secondary Signal phone number using Google Voice if you're in the United States. You can also set it up with an application like Twilio. This takes a really long time on the Twilio end of things, but it can be a solution for your problem. And so I've written guides with the help of some of my friends here in the security community, including Harlow Holmes, who is going to be speaking next. But this entire effort has been primarily about gathering feedback, both from experts as well as community members, and trying to better understand their needs. And so I encourage everybody to look into user research as one potential way to systematically better understand the needs of the communities with whom you work. And if that's not an option, go find those experts. Go make sure that you're pulling in feedback at least from the experts. And there are a lot of circumstances for which getting expert feedback instead of individually gathering feedback is one of the best options, especially when we're talking about at-risk groups. Sometimes it can be actively dangerous to somebody's health or well-being to talk to them directly, especially if they're under surveillance, direct surveillance. Talking to experts who are able to act as a proxy for those groups can be really helpful as well. And I'm happy to be your proxy when speaking to a news community. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Martin. Next, we'll be hearing from Harlow Holmes. Harlow is the Director of Newsroom Digital Security at the Freedom of the Press Foundation. Harlow helps journalists learn how to secure their newsrooms as well as secure communications with their sources. Thank you for being here today, Harlow.
Clicker. Nice. Thanks. Okay. Oops. Back. Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm carrying my laptop because it not only contains my notes, but is also a security blanket of mine. I'm going to talk to you about my work and my research recently. I'm going to tell this story in 3 chapters. One is more about the meta aspects of the digital security training space. The second chapter is probably a frank discussion that some of you might not like. And then third is really, really fun, hopefully, about how I've actually been applying a lot of these topics in the field, as we say. So, real quick background, Freedom of the Press Foundation is, we like to call ourselves a 21st century organization for 21st century journalists. And so this comprises technical support in terms of software, bespoke software, digital security trainings, consultations, etc. Obviously, a very, very loud and proud legal advocacy department, and also journalist advocacy. And yeah, this training is what I do and head up in the New York office. I have a background in digital security by way of mobile development for human rights defenders, which was a petrifying job, and I'm kind of happy I don't do that anymore. But over the years, I've gotten to really come to know very, very intimately a number of developers of primarily open source tools in the space that are saving lives every day. Also have strong relationships with, I guess, San Francisco types like yourself, in order to make some inroads in influencing policy on behalf of the extreme populations that we serve. And this is how we win. Collaboration within the InfoSec community, as Martin had just mentioned, when he wrote this really, really awesome how-to guide on how to, have a pseudonymous signal identity. That actually, I helped collaborate in writing, the pseudocode, just to show people how it's done. That actually changed a lot, and it's also one example of, similar projects that we all do in this space. We keep in touch, and we work on little projects together and take people by surprise. Another thing that is important in how we do our work, especially from my position, working with so many journalists, is to keep lines of communication open with the press. If something is broken, we're the ones who, get on the phone with, I don't know, Forbes reporters, for instance, and explain not only what has happened, but also use our ability to narrativize it in order to establish a narrative that we hope is responsible, technically correct, and ultimately accessible. And it's actually really, really cool when, I will go into somebody's office and do a digital security training, and then the next week they're writing an article about the stuff that we talked about. So this is actually a very easily understandable, one-to-one direct relationship straight from, our corner of information security and open source activism, and what you actually see in, your favorite website of choice. We also encourage to meet developers in the middle. So especially because I come from a development background, knowing how to file a bug report, file or open a GitHub issue, or do a pull request or something like that in order to help developers out is a really, really great way of translating what you have to say to end users who have never seen GitHub before, and putting that directly in the hands or in the minds of the developers on these tools. And it's actually really, really encouraging to know that just the way that our corner of the internet works, like if we did want to see something happen in an app like Signal or Mailvelope or whatever, like it's really just like, it's very, very easy to get these developers' attention and to make sure that they understand the urgency. OK, so that's the end of chapter 1. So I did want to talk about threat modeling. And normally, when we teach threat modeling, and I'll go into our specific metrics for that, when we usually teach threat modeling, we tell the people that we're training that they have these adversaries out there in the world. And of course, we try to make it less vague, have them flesh it out, understand that there is, the jealous X adversary, and then there's the 3-letter agency adversary. And knowing the difference between the two is really going to save you a lot of worry. But I also want to mention that we are your adversary. There are a lot of things that people do in this area of the country regarding policies, especially regarding user privacy, data retention, encryption, and the political weight behind that, are decisions that we aren't necessarily happy with, and we will come and get you. So please continue to listen to us when we say how important these things are. And I'm going to kind of walk through a couple of examples so you understand that. So, all right. A lot of my time is actually spent on a really, really awesome project that is funded by a variety of organizations in partnership with the Ford Foundation, with Sundance, with this other really, really excellent group called the Doc Society, to work with documentary filmmakers on their often bizarre and bespoke digital security needs. And so over the past, I guess, 2 years that I've been on this project, I've gotten to work with a huge number of filmmakers of different kind of capacities with different resources, and do, in addition to using this as an opportunity to hone my training skill set, also using it as an opportunity to get kind of a anthropological overview of what this community is like. So filmmakers are all of these things. They are awesome. They are incredibly busy. They're really, really innovative, and they'll pick up something and repurpose it, and then that's something that in and of itself is Oscar worthy. That said, they're not digital security experts, and they expect things to just work. So we teach, ultimately, the point of this initiative that we're working on is to put, starting from threat modeling, which is a very, very important methodology to learn, but putting tools in filmmakers' hands so they can, one, protect, these assets. One, protecting themselves, protecting their footage, often which the footage is, entirely unique. And if anything happens to that footage, if it's destroyed, then that's a huge problem. Learning how to protect people who you interview with, fixers, et cetera, all because, and realizing that these funding organizations that work with these filmmakers that actually write checks and fulfill grants need to expect filmmakers in order to take care of this due diligence beforehand, lest they put themselves in danger, put their subjects in danger, or more commonly, they just lose some money on a production that goes way out of budget. So these are some types. The community filmmaker is that's usually the independent person who's doing maybe doing an investigation for the first time with not only with their camera but also using next generation tools. And so there's three things that takeaways for working with a community filmmaker type. Is one, this is a really, really great place to start off with the crypto party. It gets people talking about their preoccupations with digital security and learn little tips in order to bring them up to speed. Also, because their budgets are so cash-strapped, you have to think about whether or not encryption or actually encrypting certain footage is going to be feasible, because it might write too many times to their cards and make the cards unusable. So there's always these toss-ups that we teach people in this class. Then there's like scouts or like location type people. Actually, this is one class where of filmmaker where Signal came in handy so often. Like, you know, how do you communicate with the fixer if you're in like a weird place on Earth, and you definitely don't want that person to have their phone number in your, you know, in your contacts. Also, like another really fun use of Signal has to do with interviewing. Like we always say, use Signal because it's end-to-end encrypted or whatever, which is great. But if you're a filmmaker and you have an interview that you actually need to record, you need to capture, how do you teach someone to safely record an end-to-end encrypted conversation without like introducing more vulnerabilities to their device? So I could go on and on forever, but I've gone 13 seconds over. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions. So.
Thank you so much, Harlow. Del Harvey is our next speaker, and she's the Vice President of Trust and Safety at Twitter. She's also known as Twitter's resident troll hunter, which I think is a fabulous job title. Del's background includes hunting pedophiles, which is crazy awesome and something pretty badass that I admire. Del has been at Twitter since 2008, where she was employee number 25. In her role at Twitter, she faces down challenges with abuse, spam, and user rights on the platform. Del, thank you very much for coming to speak with us.
Thank you. Hi there. I would introduce myself, but it was already done for me. I was very pleased with myself, just to be completely honest with you, about coming up with the whole personal protective equipment, product policy and enforcement pun up there. That was pretty much the highlight. Also, that's my daughter, so enjoy her personal protective equipment there. So you've heard about advocating for a pretty wide range of different groups, high-risk groups, and you've heard about how you don't really know what you're doing because you don't really know those groups. And at least in those instances, the folks who were talking earlier generally at least had an idea of what group they were talking about. And what I'm here to talk about is how I try to do this for literally everyone. Not literally everyone, but everyone who has used Twitter or who uses Twitter or who might use Twitter at some point in the future. So at least a fair number of people. Everyone's favorite quote from the InfoSec side of the house. So there are obviously challenges when you're advocating for high-risk groups, even when they're in the known knowns bucket, when you know who they are and what they're trying to do and what their risk profile is and what could go wrong. It's still a challenge because there's all sorts of things that you have to do in terms of going to them and making sure that you're solving the problems that they want solved first and all that sort of thing. And with known unknowns, where you maybe know that you don't know what the group needs, you can go out and find people who do and talk to them and get their feedback and make sure that you're not making terrible mistakes when you try to solve problems. I have generally found that one of the most challenging situations to find yourself in is figuring out how to advocate for your unknown unknowns. You don't know who they are or what they're doing, why they're doing it, what they're trying to avoid have happen, but you just sort of know they're out there. So I guess they're known unknown unknowns, something like that, stacking unknowns. And, you know, there's a whole bunch of different ways you can try to address this. For me, for how we've tried to handle it at Twitter, it comes down to three main areas, which are product policy and enforcement. It's all coming full circle with that title slide. On the product side, I will say that hands down, if you are not of product yourself, but working with them, it is incredibly important that you start out by relationship building, because it is so useful if you are positioning yourself as there to remove roadblocks and help make the final product a better one, versus saying, hey, look at all the horrible things that you didn't think of that could happen here. Everything is going to be ruined, and you will be to blame for it. Which might point out why they want to talk to you, but will probably make them somewhat averse to like coming to you again or looking forward to the conversation. If you can instead say, hey, love the product that you're working on. I see a few small things that we could tweak. We could do A, B, or C, or even just A or B, and that would address it. Could we try that? It becomes a much healthier conversation. And it's a better way of sort of demonstrating your value within that conversation, too. It's also worth noting that, no matter who the audience is, whether it's within product, whether you are a product, there's a bunch of straightforward protections that you can try to advocate for, even if you don't know who the person is who's going to be using those protections. Things like on Twitter, block or mute or protected accounts or two-factor, and even options like the sensitive content interstitial or the quality filter, things where the person who's on Twitter can choose what their experience is. And it's also worth thinking about what I generally refer to as unintended exposure and ways that you can reduce that. For example, when Twitter started hosting images, we made the decision to strip out all metadata from the image so that we weren't in this situation where, somebody has a new smartphone and they're uploading pictures of, their house or their kid doing something cute, and they don't realize that encoded in that image is the latitude and longitude of exactly where the picture was taken. And if we don't strip that out, anybody who knows how to access it can now see exactly where they live. And that's one of those things where people are like, wait, there's what? Like, I still regularly hear that that's a surprise to people, so that means that maybe we should just not make them have to know that, and we should just take steps to make sure that they don't have to deal with the issues that could pretty easily stem from that. Now, for policy areas, planning for the unknown unknowns pretty much involves, among other things, planning for edge cases, in addition to setting baseline policies meant to protect marginalized and frequently targeted individuals and groups. The qualifier there is at scale, and a lot of the companies here know about scale. Edge cases become way more common. We have hundreds of millions of tweets per day, so that could mean we have hundreds of edge cases a day if you're just talking about a 1 in a million chance. And when you're dealing with that level of scale, it means that those edge cases can't just be something where you're like, well, we'll come up with a way of handling that when it pops up. It's a little late then. So you have to come up with something beforehand. You have to at least come up with a process beforehand for handling the unexpected. So you can only ever expect the unexpected. Some of the specific protections that we've tried to put in place from a policy perspective in some of those sort of we aren't quite sure what could go wrong, but we know something could go wrong, would include things like, we have support for pseudonymity on Twitter. You don't have to use your real name, your legal name, your birth name, any variant upon any of those. You can use the name that you choose. We also have, for example, we have a data licensing business for public Twitter data, but we actually have explicit policy carve-outs prohibiting the use of that information, even though it's public, for anything related to surveillance or targeting individuals. Because, again, it's public information, but we don't think that's how it should be used. And we have a pretty robust, what's the next piece? Enforcement process around all of those things, and a use case review process that comes into play, too. So I have learned over the years that nothing makes people who have to do enforcement happier than being asked to deal with tons of edge cases in gray areas at scale. No, anything makes them happier than having to deal with tons of edge cases in gray areas at scale, actually. And that's totally understandable, but part of the reason that it's super, super important that you partner really closely with the people who are doing your enforcement, if it's not within your own organization, is because that partnership is key to figuring out where you're screwing up. And the chances are very good that you're screwing up somewhere. On Twitter, it's very easy for us to find out if we're screwing up how we enforce our policies, because people are in my @replies telling me how dumb we are and how we made so many dumb decisions, and they can't imagine what we were thinking. So it's a really easy way to just get that just crisp feedback cycle. And you know what? We actually look at that stuff. They are not always right. We were not always being dumb. Sometimes we were being dumb, though. And even in instances where maybe we were right about what we did, it helps highlight areas where we failed to communicate clearly why we did what we did or didn't do. Because if there's a failure in what people's expectations are, that's still a failure on our part, and that's still something we have to address. So figuring out how to get that feedback loop, even if it's not your personal @replies, and I would generally recommend it not being your personal @replies if you have the choice. Putting that into place is really useful. And if you screwed up, hopefully you want to fix it and prevent it from happening again. This is the dream. We all live for these goals. And we've taken some really specific steps around that, at least at Twitter. Things like creating cultural context trainings that are given to anybody who does enforcement around abuse reports, for example, and making sure that they're targeting known edge cases with that, creating a mechanism that makes it really easy for us to quickly send out updates to those trainings if something comes up. We start seeing a new attack vector, we start seeing a new type of harassment or abuse, making it really easy to push those updates out and get everybody up to speed on what we're doing now, for example. Improving our appeals process, though we still have work to do there. It's something that we're spending a lot of time and energy thinking about, including how to make sure that we're continuing to support pseudonymity and limiting how much user data we collect from people who really want to limit how much they're giving to us. And finally, developing escalation channels and processes for handling situations when there is a risk of imminent harm or danger to someone. So in other words, not just sort of saying, well, somebody's in imminent danger here, but the process says that we go do this thing, and sorry, like making sure that there's still a way to get those situations escalated so that they can be reviewed by the appropriate folks and we can figure out what we should be doing. And look, maybe you already do all of these things. Maybe all of this is super old hat to you. If so, awesome. I would love to connect, share best practices, talk about how we can continue spreading the gospel of these things. If not, maybe you don't do any of this or you only do some of it and you want to start doing the rest. And in that case, I'd still love to connect with you. And then maybe we can see how we can help and help share information and make this better. And if it isn't relevant to you at all, I hope you enjoyed the picture of my daughter in a hat and the Donald Rumsfeld quote. So across the board, though, thank you guys so much. I hope this was at least mildly interesting. That's the bar I tried to set. And I'll turn it over to the panel.
We're now going to have a moderated panel with our speakers, all of whom are going to come back out here to have a discussion. Shira Frankel will be moderating the panel. Shira covers cybersecurity for the New York Times, and previously she spent a decade in the Middle East serving as a foreign correspondent, reporting for BuzzFeed, NPR, the Times of London, and others. Thank you for leading the discussion, Shira.
Yes. Great, thank you everyone. One of the things we were just talking about backstage was how nice it was that our panelists seemed to kind of be in consensus about their message, about what the important considerations of security are and what people back home should be taking away from our discussion today. So I wanted to open up the chat just now with asking you all, what do you think when you're trying to get your team to consider security at the very beginning of their product development, when they come to you guys with an idea and they're excited, what's the first thing you say to them when you want them to consider the diverse audience that's going to be receiving these products? And sorry, I'm not going to call on anyone. You guys just speak up.
Unless we don't speak up. And then
Unless I get blank stares and then...
The first thing that I typically ask for is the functionality. When we're talking about building new product stuff, I want to know what it's supposed to do, what the user expects it to do, and then I want to know really who we're ideally designing things for so we can go and root out any biases that might exist in the process. But I always want to know how it works, because if it works in a way that is potentially way too confusing or only speaks to the engineer who is designing it, we already have a problem. And we need to really make sure that we are digging to the core problem we're trying to solve and not solving for some other thing that's been imagined. So for me, it's always just, what are we doing? Why are we doing it this way? And what do we expect out of it? And then we can talk about like actually calling up friends and telling them to hammer on it for a little bit.
Sometimes I find that I'll be told, they'll come to me and just say, you know what, we want you to tell us what could go wrong here. We've thought about it. We're pretty sure it's totally fine. Like, what could go wrong? And I find that sometimes just asking them to start from the assumption that someone has died as a result of this product that they're launching. And this is only when they ask me to do this to them, to be clear. This is not generally how I provide feedback. Just close. No, okay, look, you guys came up with this. Somebody died as a result of this. How did it happen? And I find that for people who do not spend their time thinking about the worst that could happen, for people where catastrophization is perhaps not their watchword, that they're often really bright people, and if you put them at the other end and they have to sort of Sherlock Holmes it to figure out how did this take place, then they're like, okay, somebody's dead. Okay, let's see here. It was probably with a candlestick in the library, and it was Colonel Mustard. And it's funny because now I actually regularly will have conversations with people who are saying, I thought about this product, and I was thinking about how somebody could die from it. And the people who overhear this and don't have context are probably alarmed. But, it's definitely it's really useful sometimes for you to help facilitate that mindset shift around where they're approaching the problem from.
I think I come to this from a slightly different angle as a user researcher, where a lot of the people who are approaching me with various product-related design challenges that they might have in mind are probably only approaching me because I'm the privacy and security user researcher on Chrome. And so chances are they've already identified a potential series of concerns, and as a consequence, it makes my job a little easier. There are also a lot of institutional controls in place at Google, and so where we have a wonderful team. Adrian is on this team where we focus on privacy and security user experience issues that are likely to affect Chrome as well as other products. And after all is said and done, a lot of that thinking has been outsourced to many, many brilliant people who I work with, and so I don't have to deal with that quite as much as, yeah.
I occasionally have to deal with this problem, but the more common scenario for me is that either a startup or a company comes to me and says, what kind of privacy and security policies should we have in order to make you not yell at us when we launch. And the other most common conversation that I have is, so we're building this product just for activists in this one particularly vulnerable population, and we haven't really done anything about security or learned anything about the population and what could possibly go wrong. So I spend a lot of time yelling. Sometimes it works. But occasionally, I end up in these conversations where I'm trying to convince the people who are building the product that their product is a bad idea, that it is poorly thought out and they should stop. And the most common scenario there is usually we want to build a platform just for high-risk activists who are worried about being watched by the government. I'm like, how about you don't put them all in one place? Maybe that would be nice. We want to build a tool, a secure communications tool, just for high-risk users who are being watched by governments. What? So that when you confiscate their phones, the government will see this tool on their phone and they'll say, I see, you are a dissident, and throw them directly into jail. Yes. It's not like that hasn't happened before. So I spend a lot of time telling people just not to do things at all. Sometimes because people could die.
I also, I highly agree with that there. There are many cases where things just do not and never are going to work as promised, simply because the use case that the use case is entirely like at odds with the technologies themselves. So once again, speaking specifically about like filmmaking stuff, like everyone in InfoSec is real in love with, I mean, as we should be, in end-to-end encryption, and everything gets encrypted, and like we have all these like really great tools or whatever, and they are great, but like there's a huge difference between like what we would encrypt and what and like a compact flash with like terabytes of data, and so. Not only that, but then there's also, like duress situations where you don't have time to encrypt all the things. You actually have to go right now. So that's something that I'm always, I'm becoming more and more sensitive to.
Actually, really quick follow-up. All of this just reminded me of a large number of situations where people have approached me to ask, hey, can we do research on X topic? And it made me think, this is actually a really bad idea. It's like, what if we invert our model from starting with technology, which is often what happens. We've built this thing that we'd like to do user research with. How do we find those participants? How do we find those users? Instead of doing that, we really ought to be doing more of a ground-up approach where we instead start with, okay, what are the needs for the communities that we care about? And then try to build around those needs.
It's like a reverse engineered threat model.
Right, right.
There's a habit of saying, if you just do this one thing, everyone's going to be safe online. And I'm wondering, I've seen two camps here. I've seen the one camp that's saying, let's have a catch-all. Let's have a catch-all policy that we can roll out to everyone and say, just use this product or just adopt these 3 habits, and it's going to affect the greatest number of people, will secure the greatest number of people. And then there are those who advocate against and say, no, this is super dangerous. By giving people a catch-all, you're essentially creating a system where everybody becomes vulnerable. I'm curious where you guys fall on this, what approach you take, and how you think the conversation should really be structured around this.
One thing that I do teach in, maybe not in Digital Security 101, but in like a little bit more advanced, I do this with a number of groups, is I actually, I show people a matrix where on, our y-axis is, so let's take like an end-to-end encrypted messaging app. Which one should I use? On your y-axis, you're going to evaluate it on whether or not like it actually works, whether or not there are design choices baked into it that make it, that once again run counter to your goal of actually having a private conversation. Like how do people treat metadata, or et cetera. And then we have our x-axis, which is actually just all about accessibility, because obviously, like, I guess, like, we can have a great conversation, but if you can't reach, members of your family on that, if you can't reach, other friends or random people that you need to talk to in your job as, like a journalist or whatever, then that's going to affect where it goes. And so ultimately, you're teaching people to make choices. And the reason why you're teaching people to make choices is because of, the limitations of reach. But it's also because, like, I don't know where we're all going to be, like, 2 years from now when, like, Signal is broken and, or, WhatsApp is closed down or whatever. We want people to have these metrics already. So whatever it is, they can make these decisions.
I tend to be pretty opinionated about what we're trying to solve for with the catch-alls, because what I find in those conversations is this feeling that security is a binary. It's a yes or a no thing. In reality, security is a really complex spectrum, and we can make incremental improvements here and there, but having this kind of absolutist idea of yes or no, and these 3 things are the things, to me just isn't the right way to look at this. What would be an improvement or a rule that we would set for everyone makes a lot of generalized decisions about who everyone might be. We can tell everyone to use 2-factor authentication. 2 members of my old lady gang have struggles with their thumbs and going back and forth with that home button to put in that 6-digit code within the 30-second time period that it needs to be actually entered into the box. It's much more about creating a process and that decision-making paradigm, and way less about use this product over here. All the products are fundamentally insecure. If they're all 99.9% secure, why is the security about the product and not the process of getting to do the thing you need done in the right way with the least risk possible?
All right, so I am going to bring a dissenting opinion. ¿Por qué no los dos? As a person who spends a lot of time giving security advice and writing content for EFF's Guide to Privacy and Security, which is surveillance self-defense, which you can see at ssd.eff.org. I spend a lot of time thinking about advice which is applicable to most people. And there are a few things that you can tell people to do that would be helpful to the majority of people. The most important thing is to frame those things in a realistic way. Say, everybody has individual privacy and security needs, but here are a few things which are fairly easy to do, which will be helpful for most people most of the time. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to solve your specific problem. But if you don't want to get down into threat modeling and figuring out what your specific problem is, this will probably cover you. And I think that that is a useful set of advice to have, and I want to advocate for that. Beyond that, telling people, look at your specific set of problems and do a lot of threat modeling and think about exactly what tools are right for solving the problems that you have, is excellent advice. But not everybody has that kind of time, and not everybody has the inclination, and we need to make room for the people who don't want to spend that much time thinking about it.
Yeah, I feel like when I hear somebody do the use Tor, use Signal advice, it often feels like it works 60% of the time every time, which I don't know what this question means to me is if we want to give advice universally, then quite often it's going to be advice that is useful to a lot of people in a lot of contexts. It doesn't mean that it's universally applicable, and so what I try to do whenever I get somebody on the hook for a moment is gauge how on the hook they are. That is, how much do I think that I can bring them with me into the security rabbit hole? And if it seems like there's only mild interests, like do these really basic things. These are really foundational, easy things that you can do. I encourage you to also read this and this and this if there's time. And usually those are security guides from places like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or to read up on materials from Freedom of the Press. I've written things in this space that sometimes I'll point people to. After all is said and done, trying to give people enough guidance to be able to get started, and using the things that they're asking about, things like Signal or password managers, as a hook. But then after that, depending on how involved they are in this process, how much investment they have in trying to go further, it might be that that's where it ends, and it might be that I continue to have conversations with them.
I would agree. I think I'm in a very similar camp to Ava in terms of, look, there are some baseline things like, hey, maybe don't type your Twitter login credentials into a random site on the internet that isn't Twitter. Like, I feel okay giving that as general guidance to people. You should avoid that. Maybe try not to use the same password at a ton of different places, or at least have like tiered passwords if you must do it, in terms of, your pizza login and your Excel help forum login. Maybe have the same password if you're less concerned about those than your email. I may have an Excel help forum login. Might be a specific example there. But at the same time, I think that what we try to do, and one way of addressing this, is to just have, similarly to your point, have tiered levels of security that users can add on, that people can say, you know what, I thought I was good with just my password and login, but I kind of want to add a phone number to this account, or I kind of want to make it so somebody can't reset my password without knowing the email address associated with the account, or I want to be able to add two-factor, or I want to be able to add XYZ. And even in situations where maybe you identify that somebody is being targeted, or you identify that somebody has had their password compromised, those are opportunities to say, hey, you might want to think about adding this additional security preference to how you're using this product because this thing happened. And ideally, you'd get people to use exactly the right methods for them before anything happened, but I've already resigned myself to the fact that people may not always be reading the help pages that I carefully write, so it may not always be before the thing happens that you can evangelize, but at least when the thing happens, definitely take advantage of that to evangelize, if at all possible.
So a quick one, if there is going to be a catch-all, if there is one thing people watching at home say, God, just give me one easy thing I can do, what is it? Is it a password manager? Is it, just use Signal? Like if you've got like 30 seconds, you're in a lift with your driver and you got to tell them like one security thing that they can incorporate right away, what's the thing you roll out?
Password manager is pretty evergreen. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty much team password manager for life. Don't talk crap about them in front of me. We're not going to be friends. Because on one aspect, if you get someone using the password manager perfectly and they have immaculate passwords, there's an improvement. On the other, if they don't do that, they still kind of have a catalog of their threat surface or their attack surface on the internet. And I'm pretty okay with that too.
Well, since we've already covered password managers, I'm going to go with two-factor, and then if you can explain the difference between SMS two-factor and an app or something like a YubiKey, do it and explain that there are tiers, there are levels to how committed you want to be to two-factor, and here are some things that you can do.
Also, and knowing that ultimately, even with the two-factor and the strong passphrases that are totally unique, you're only as good as your "I forgot my password" settings are.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, the answers to your security questions should not be real.
Lie to your security questions. Tell tiny stories in them.
Has that been fixed yet in Facebook? I remember like a bit ago.
Alex.
There were still security questions, but they weren't changeable for a certain group of people, maybe having to do with when they signed on to the service. And this was before security culture. So obviously everyone was telling the truth in their security questions back in 2005 when that was like not a thing. Yeah. Anywho.
Yeah, I always randomize my passwords or my security questions in my password manager and then store them there.
Yep.
Since we've got authentication covered, I guess, and I'm making Dell's life really hard. It's like at the end of the line.
Not the first time this has happened to me.
I'm going to go with just updates on all of your devices. Yeah, Cooper likes that one. Just because there are so many hardworking people who are they're desperately trying to push you these updates. And all it's about is not only this feature request, but also patching vulnerabilities. It's an extremely straightforward way to protect yourself with very little effort at all. So.
Password managers, authentication, updates. I'm going to go with, make sure that you go through all of those accounts that you actually use and like, and make sure your backup email addresses and contact information, all that sort of stuff is still up to date, because the number of people who I know who have lost access even to primary email accounts because the backup email that they had on it was at a site that is, they never used that email. It got given up. It got rotated back into use or the like, and somebody else grabbed it with the sole purpose of compromising their primary account is not a small number. And just making sure that you've got that phone number associated, you've got an email address that you are in control of, that you know how to access, that your security questions are fixed on, and all of that jazz. Take that step.
I want to close with asking you about some of the more unique threat modeling that you've had to do, some of the unique cases. A lot of the purpose of this conference was to say that, the audience for which we're creating security is not uniform. They're not homogenous, so how do we create solutions for them? And I think it'd be useful to hear about some of the more sort of interesting cases that you've had to, I know some of you have brought this up in your talks already, but if there are any other cases that you looked at and you thought, wow, this presented an incredibly specific challenge that we had to, we had to workshop, we had to figure out how to answer this.
I totally have one. And it's one of my favorite stories because it was completely inadvertent on the part of the threat, so to speak, which is back in 2009, so back in the dawn of time with Twitter. The trending topic algorithm was a very simple algorithm. It was what's being said the most, minus some things like the or ah or what have you. And it was completely, it got broken by teenage girls. And it got broken by teenage girls in a really robust and significant way. Because what was happening is they would tweet to whichever celebrity or musician or artist that they were a fan of. And they would just tweet, for example, hashtag Justin Bieber, I love you, come to insert country here, or insert city here. And that's all they would tweet. Hundreds and hundreds of times per day. And it wasn't automated. We put in duplicate matching, so then they started typing hashtag Justin Bieber, come to X, we love you, 1, 2, 3, 787. And they had other people who they followed who were doing this same thing. And these were real people on their real accounts where their timelines must have just been exhortations to Justin Bieber to please come to their location because they loved him. So trending topics suddenly turned into basically the Justin Bieber, please come to blank, we love you column, which was not its original intended purpose. So we made some shifts. You know what? We're going to shift it to not just be like what's being talked about the most. We'll do like changes in velocity, right? Like all of a sudden this topic is being talked about more than it usually is. So they started seeing that Justin Bieber was falling off the trending topics, and they were like, this can't be. So they started coming up with new hashtags for it. So it was theoretically a different topic. And it turned back into the Justin Bieber, I love you, come to this location trending column. And it was really fascinating because it wasn't like they were trying to do anything bad. They had no ill intent whatsoever. They just wanted Justin Bieber to come perform, you guys. Like, that was all. These were believers. They were passionate. I love that passion and enthusiasm, but it was breaking our shit. So we ended up, it was actually a really helpful way to start figuring out how to avoid that sort of basic manipulation and gamification of the trend, but it was not an expected threat vector. Now I suspect teenage girls for everything. and that has actually held me in pretty good stead.
I'd say the most interesting threat modeling situation scenario I've had to work on was a couple of years ago with, again, my old lady gang. Figuring out a way to help people get back into accounts when they have memory issues, or they can completely lose their concept of identity, and they need an identity like re-verification process for their own brains, is an extremely difficult thing. Because there are lots of things that we would say as security people, or that other security people might say, are terrible, but they're actually the thing that worked in our particular situation. Things like writing down a clue to part of a password in a safe place in the house. Well, I've been told many times, but that's fundamentally insecure, because what if they don't know about how to physically secure the thing? What's safe to us when we're like, oh crap, let's hide the PGP keys from the NSA, is totally different from, I don't know who I am, but my computer can help me work through this particular episode if I do it right. Touch ID can be helpful here sometimes. It ended up being part of our scenario for recovery. But again, if you have 10 attempts before the device wipes itself, or you tried too many times and you have to come up with the password again, you're still at the same problem. And it was something that ended up being a little bit of a game. We had some good practice runs, but also a little terrifying to see kind of how much of what we build is built with this mindset that everyone's brain and eyeballs and physical parts are all going to work the same way and have the same capabilities.
Any other quick ones? No? All right, we have gone 25 seconds over, but I think we've gotten a good start to the day's sessions. I'd like to thank all our fantastic panelists.
Thank you.
Well done.